Okay, so good evening. So today I'll be talking about the topic that connects two of the biggest issues in our world, which is global warming and intercultural communication. Now, we need to define global warming. Now, according to Oxford Language, it is the gradual increase in the overall temperature in Earth's atmosphere, generally attributed to the greenhouse effect caused by increased levels of carbon dioxide, CFC, and etc. As for Cambridge Dictionary, it defines the gradual increase in world temperatures caused by gases that are collecting in the air around the Earth and stop heat from escaping. Now, both of these definition have the same word, which is the gradual increase. Pardon my friend, he's singing at the back. As for the Earth's atmosphere, it attributes to the greenhouse effect. Now, what is the greenhouse effect? To simply put it, it's where the heat are stopped from escaping the Earth's atmosphere, thus increasing the temperature. Now, what's exactly trapping this heat? It is the carbon dioxide, CFC, and other pollutants in the air caused by industrial. So, the experience maybe differ depending on which place are you living in. For some, colder places would experience warmer weather. As for those who living in the coastal areas like Penang right now, they may experience rising sea level. And as for farmers, they may face droughts and crop failures. Now, although the effects are different, it is all caused by the same factors, which is the global warming. Now, in this presentation, I'll evaluate the role of effective intercultural communication in addressing the challenge of global warming across diverse cultural setting. Now, we need to define what exactly does intercultural communication means. Well, intercultural means taking place between cultures or derived from different cultures. Communication is the act of exchanging info through speaking, writing, or other mediums. Could be social media, that is a medium too. So combining it together, we could understand that it is the exchange of informations between cultures or language, traditions, etc., etc. Now, we need to understand global warming. Let's start with the basics, to be honest. Actually, I just explained it. We going straight to the global warming. So it is a shared but unequal challenge. It's important to recognize that global warming affects everyone, but not equally. As I said earlier, some may experience effects in forms of weather, some may experience it in how the sea level rises. Pardon my friend, he's sad right now. His girlfriend just broke up with him. So, moving on, the developed countries are responsible for the majority of historical carbon emissions. However, it is the developing nations that often suffer more from the harsh effects, such as floods, droughts, and food insecurity. So, this imbalance has created a tension in global climate negotiation. So, whenever a negotiation was made, of course, these developing countries would put the blame onto the developed nations because they are the one who are responsible with the emissions. However, these are not just political disagreements; they're cultural also. In different society have different worldviews about responsibility, fairness, and justice. We cannot just simply say that some countries argue you caused the problem, so you should fix it. Other respond, we all responsible. We all are responsible because we live in the same planet, so everyone must act. So this creates tension. For example, in Western context, environmental issues are often discussed through the lens of science and economics, carbon taxes, green technology, and emission targets. But in many indigenous or Eastern cultures, nature is viewed as sacred, part of a living balance. Climate actions becomes more than just a moral or spiritual duty. Rather, it becomes a moral or spirituality rather than just a financial one. Okay, so when this perspective meet on a global stage, misunderstandings are bound to happen, and that's why effective intercultural communication is not optional; it's essential. So, the next part is the role of effective intercultural communication. So, how exactly those effective intercultural communication help? Well, to begin with, it builds trust. When people feel that their culture and values are respected, they are more likely to cooperate. There's no point in going towards them and say, uh, without knowing their backgrounds or their culture, their language, if they are not feel respected, they won't cooperate. It's just like that between you and me also. If you do not feel respected, you won't cooperate. The second, it promotes inclusion. So why do I say this? Because global warming solutions can't be one size fits all. No, it's impossible. Every culture has unique knowledge and local wisdom, and communication ensure that these voices are heard. So what I mean by this is that when we promote inclusion through proper communication, we could talk with other, let's say, other communities, other people that more often than not may have different approach to how to handle these issues. So the better approach we have, the higher chance we could come up with alternatives to counter global warming. So third, it encourages collaboration. Like I said earlier, after we build trust and we include more than one party, then we could collaborate. In what way? When scientists or policymakers and communities communicate clearly across culture, they can share resources, they can share data and strategies that benefit everyone. By this, I mean that when you when they already build the trust of the people, they could ask help from the people to give them data of their surroundings, and from the data of the surroundings, we could provide solutions or strategies or approach that could how to say, to counter these data that they collected. Now, even when they are let's say, excuse me, when they are trying to find a solution to the problems, they also take into account the norms of the culture, the traditional background, or any religious values that certain communities that suffer from the global warming holds, so as to not offend them, of course. For instance, during the climate change conference, like the United Nations COP meeting, delegates come from nearly 200 countries. Without translation, cultural mediators, and respectful dialogue, those meetings would descend into chaos, of course. In short, effective intercultural turns global diversity from a barrier into strength, which is good. So, of course, we're gonna provide some case study. So, first case study is the Paris Agreement in 2015. World leaders gathered to form a single plan to reduce, to reduce global emissions. It is one of the best examples, to be honest, because at that time, world leaders gathered to form a single plan to reduce global emission. It wasn't easy, of course. Each country had its own priorities. Some wanted strong limits on carbon, others feared losing jobs or economic growth. They took into account about the countries, how this action would affect the countries, which is important. We can't just jump into conclusion. We can't just jump into action without taking into account what it would affect and which countries, which party it could affect. But through negotiation, translation, and respectful cultural differences, they reach an agreement. The final text was carefully worded into balance from different viewpoints, and they reach a diplomatic masterpiece of communication, if I could say it so. Now, for example, the phrase common but differentiated responsibilities recognize that while all nations share the duty to act, some have greater capacity and historical responsibility than others. This wording didn't come from one culture or one country. It came from communication between many. So we can evaluate the Paris Agreement as proof that when intercultural communication is effective, even the most complex global issue can find common action. Now, pardon me. You go to the next case study number 2, which is the indigenous knowledge and collaborations. Now, friends, for centuries, indigenous people have developed deep ecological knowledge. how to preserve soil, protect forests, and manage water more sustainably. So, for a long time, this wisdom was ignored by modern science. Now, but today things are changing. Global warming urges us to find answers or different approaches from indigenous culture, who more often than not face the consequences firsthand from global warming. So, in places like the Amazon, for example, scientists are learning from tribal communities that about sustainable agriculture and forest preservation. In the Arctic, the Inuit hunters, if you're familiar with them, share information about the melting ice, of course, and the wildlife changes. These data help researchers to understand the effects of climate change. But of course, these collaborations only work when communication is respectful. So when outsiders enter community with arrogance or without understanding local customs, mistrust forms quickly. And through mistrust, the locals won't cooperate well with the scientists. Apologize for the background noise. But we continue on. These collaborations only work when communication is respectful. That is true. So, when they truly listen, communication builds a bridge between scientific and traditional knowledge. So here again, intercultural communication doesn't just share information. It creates mutual respect, leading to a better environmental outcomes. So the third and the last case study is going to be the Great Green Wall of Africa. The Great Green Wall of Africa. If you're familiar with that, I'm sure some of you have heard it before. It is about a project, a pretty ambitious one, to be honest. So the idea is, in recent years, the desert of Sahara, the Sahara Desert, begin to expand from the sand that are carried from the wind. So this causes many worries because when the land is drought, when it's a desert, and the desert is spreading, you can't do much in the desert. It affects the economy, and it affects more than one country's economy. It is actually affecting more than 20, if I'm not mistaken, 20 countries. So the 20 countries involved, each with its own language, government, and tradition, they form a collaboration to build, to plant a belt of trees across the entire width of North Africa to stop the desertification. The project's success really depends on the strong intercultural collaboration between local farmers, communities, NGOs, and foreign partners. Why? Because they need help from all people, from all parties, of course, because desertification affects more than just the local people. It affects the economy, and when the economy is affected, the countries are affected, and when the countries are affected, it's going to lead to some major problems. And Africa only have some few major problems. But let's not go with that, of course. So communication helps align environmental goals with cultural realities, such as local farming traditions or religious values tied to the land. So it is very crucial. In many ways, the Great Grand Wall is not just an environmental project, if I may say so. It's also a communication project. And of course, when all these are taken into account, when we talk about dealing with more than one party that are coming from different background, tradition, and religious value, religious views, they are bound to have challenges and barriers when it comes to effective communication. So there are several barriers here. The first one being the language differences, of course. That is the most prominent one. Misinterpretation can change the meaning of scientific terms or policy goals. So we need to realize that it is not as, how to say, translation is a hard thing, because when you mistranslate it or misinterpret it, it's going to cause conflict. So when we're dealing with multiple languages at once, misinterpretation is a very dangerous thing. So we really need a proper communication on how to deal with this. The second one is the power imbalance, which is the voice from poorer or smaller nations may be ignored in global discussion. Now, this is more often than not still going on till today. Countries in the Oceania, if I'm not mistaken, or in the continent of Australia, as they call it right now, several countries already voice out their worries about rising sea levels. However, global nations seems to not have taken it into account or have not do little actions in order to deal with this. So yes, when the country doesn't have a really big reputation, more often than not, it would lead to their voices being ignored by the global stage. The third one is stereotypes and ethnocentrism. Some nations still assume their approach is the right one. So what do I mean by this? A country's approach. Hold on, everyone. Let me repass my word. It is hard to, how to say, when nations still assume the approach is the right one, it means they will probably just stick to an approach which do little to nothing when dealing with how to say, global warming. So they are not open-minded, and therefore they do not concern themselves with new approaches or better alternatives. And the fourth one is the political interest. Even good communication can fail if national agendas dominate global cooperations. Now, this could be meant by the approach of a nation to further strengthen any part of the economies that, how to say, affecting the, I'm sorry, that affects the environment. Now, one of the best example of this is probably the nation of Haiti, if I'm not mistaken. The people, how to say, if I could remember it correctly, the people drain their natural resources, which cause several effects on their own country. So the next part is we're going to talk about the strategies on how to improve these problems. So how can we improve this intercultural communications to address global warming? Well, first is, of course, through education. You might already have that in mind by now. Teaching people to understand and appreciate cultural diversity. So second is representation. We need to ensure that climate discussions include indigenous peoples, youth, and marginalized communities, because when we talk about intercultural, the name itself refers to multiple cultures. So we need to involve more than one party if we are going to talk about global warming that also affects many parties made of many backgrounds. So the third one is also translation and accessibility. This is what I mentioned earlier. Scientific reports and agreements should be available in multiple language. I'm sorry. So when there are certain reports and agreements, they maybe usually comes in English or maybe some the European language, which is hard to accessible. People don't understand. Other countries don't understand what this report means, so they require translation. The translation, a more accurate translation. We can't just simply translate it out of the book, because if you're familiar with the experience of using Google Translate, it doesn't really capture. It could misinterpret it changed the words a little bit from other synonyms, and thus changing the meaning of the sentence or the words. So we can't do that with scientific reports and agreements, of course. And the fourth is storytelling, using stories and not just statistic. This is to make climate change relatable across cultures. Now, stories, by this I mean cases from other people who are affected by this. So we could say this country A is an island nation. Island nation. Their struggles with, how to say, a rising sea level. So when the story are told to the global level, other island nation or areas that suffers the same problem could also voice out their worries or maybe even their approach on how to deal with this. So when we communicate with empathy and respect, people are more willing to change their behavior. and share knowledge, and thus take action together. And 11 is we're going to evaluate and having a reflection. Now let's evaluate the overall role of intercultural communities. Uh, Overall role of intercultural communication in this issue. So some of the strengths of it is, of course, it builds understanding and cooperation across nations. It also allows diverse cultural knowledge to be part of global climate solutions. It also turns global warming into a shared human issue rather than a divided political one. However, it also have limitations, like I said earlier, the challenges. It often slow and complicated because translation take a while, takes long. And the second one is the power difference can silence small voices. The third one is deep-rooted cultural values can clash, which delays action. But in balance, of course, in the end, balance is important. That the strengths clearly outweigh the weakness. So without intercultural communication, we risk fighting global warming as separate nation instead of as one humanity. Yes. So in conclusion, global warming is not only a battle of science or policy. It's a test of our ability to communicate as species. The more we learn to understand each other's culture, the stronger our response to climate change will be. Intercultural communication allows us to share knowledge, align our goals, and build trust across boundaries. It reminds us that no nation, culture, or even individual can solve global warming alone. It's impossible. So ultimately, effective intercultural communication gives us something that technology cannot, and that is unity. And unity, more than anything else, is what the world needs to heal out. Thank you.